If you show up to a gunfight with a knife, chances are you're going to have your guts ripped out, shot dead in the street like a dog. Show up to a currency war with paper, like Mervyn King or Ben Bernanke or these other central bank clowns, and you will also be eviscerated, gunned down in the street by the gold vigilantes. And that's a good thing. Stacey?
Yes, Max. Over the past few weeks, we've seen the coming of the showdown at the OK currency corral, right? You've seen various things. You've seen wanted dead or alive, essentially, against the U.S. dollar right there in the middle of the poster.
Oh, that looks like Ben Bernanke! That looks like Ben Bernanke! Yes, wanted dead or alive. And I mean that metaphorically, of course. I would never suggest that central bankers would be gunned down and hunted down like dogs and ripped open and have their guts pulled out because of their profligate ways. I would never suggest that.
Now, in this past week leading up to the G20, we also had the G7. They were denying that there's a currency war. That, of course, you need an official denial in order to confirm that it is true. David Cameron was asked by some old codger in Prime Minister Questions Time about his experience. This old guy had lived through the Great Depression, and he said, it looks like with all this quantitative easing that we're actually trying to devalue the pound, but so is the yen, the Japanese yen in America. They're all devaluing our currencies. Now, I lived through the Great Depression and World War II, and that led to hot war. Because it became trade war, then hot war. And here's how David Cameron answered.
I think what he says is important. No one wants to see a string of competitive devaluations. Obviously, what happened to sterling as a result of the very deep recession here was a depreciation. I don't believe that you depreciate your way to growth, whatever country you are, but what you should do is use the benefit when there's a structural change to make sure you increase your competitiveness, and that is what Britain needs to do.
Well, financial illiteracy runs through number 10 Downing Street with David Cameron. You know, the central banks are caught serving two masters. They're printing trillions of dollars and yens and pounds. At the same time, central banks since 2009 have reversed a 40-year trend. They're buying massive amounts of gold. And these two things are not going to finish together. One is going to win, one is going to lose. And the gold market's saying the gold market's going to win. The bond market now in these countries looks as though it's hit the wall and is starting to fall apart.
And of course, he's lying there as if they could take advantage of devaluation. Everybody is doing it. Venezuela devalued recently by over 30%. In the UK, the pound sterling has fallen by over 10% against international currencies, and yet their export market is up barely 0.1%. So it hasn't worked for them. They showed up to a global currency war with their fiat paper, and it hasn't done anything for them.
Right. It's not going to work because you can't have any winners in a... It's like playing that rock, paper, scissors game with everyone has paper. You know, and they're just all showing paper, and of course none of them going to win, except those with rock, when in this case would be not a rock of cocaine like Pete Diddy might have in this, but a rock of gold.
So there's the question asked, end currency war with a gold standard. This happened on Financial Times and on Bloomberg Television. They interviewed TCW Group's Komal Sri Kumar and Bank of New York Mellon's Michael Woolfolk. They were asked what the risks from currency war were and how to stop it. Now, Sri Kumar said that he thought the gold standard, if we brought the gold standard back, it would end this currency war. And it would be no different to how good it was, he said. He said it would be as good as it was during 1945 to 1971. We were on an international gold standard post-Bretton Woods. The U.S. dollar was backed by gold on international trade. And it was good times then. He said, quote, it worked. The world was in prosperity. There was economic growth. And there was clearly certainty in terms of what exchange rates were.
Well, we've never been off a gold standard. This experiment since 1971 of global fiat money trading against each other is failing. And we're going to go back to what was in place for thousands of years. A gold standard.
But I also also think it was 1971 when Nixon went off the gold standard. What it was the disarming of the population who had to work for a living. Because you could see that in the charts, because I thought, well, let's look at these charts again, because this guy Kumar says that this was a time of prosperity, and yet the propaganda you hear from the very working population, people who have to work for a living, they'll tell you, we can't go back to a gold standard because that's for the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers and the wealthy and the super uber wealthy. But look at these charts. This is the chart going back to 1945, and it shows you the blue line is the productivity increase in labor units. Red is the median household income. As you see, from exactly 1971, the median household lost their bargaining power, and all the productivity gains went to the top. They did not go to workers, and in fact, the median household wage went down once we broke from the gold standard, because they were disarmed.
Right. Since going off the gold standard, wealth has been accumulated by floating debt and by leverage. The average household will borrow 10 times their income to buy a house on a mortgage. And the rising asset value from the inflation this has caused will give the homeowner a sense of net worth appreciation. But the average bankster on Wall Street or the City of London can borrow 1,000 times their income. And they get paid based on that multi-hundred billion, trillion-dollar leverage that they're floating in the game. And over the past 20 to 30 years, or 40 years since going off the gold standard, this has meant hollowing out of the economy to the banksters and leaving the poor suckers who can only borrow 10 times their income high and dry because the asset values crashed. And of course, what's happening now is that private equity funds like BlackRock are buying out all the homeowners in America that went bankrupt during the last controlled demolition of the economy in 2008. Now those people are living like serfs in their own homes, paying rent to BlackRock. BlackRock, of course, you know, this guy Schwartz, who runs BlackRock, he's a terrorist, he's a financial terrorist, and of course he's terrorizing the people in America who are now suffering as a result.
So back to this chart here, that they lost their power, their negotiating power, because the parameters were being set by the people who were financializing the economy. So these guys own the paper world. And you decided, let's get rid of gold and I'll negotiate with these paper pushers. And of course you lose. Now The Economist this week actually has a piece calling bankers unique in the world because it's quasi-Marxism, because they literally own the means of production. They own the means of printing the paper.
Right, there's no unit of labor that has any representation in this economy. And I've told people in the UK and I've told people in the US, people who work for a living, people who might be affiliated with unions like a Bill O'Reilly or a Rush Limbaugh, or the people like that who are part of unions in America.
Yes.
You know, they are union members, Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly.
Do you want to explain, you know, Rush Limbaugh and Bill O'Reilly are very extreme right-wing television hosts in America who spend their entire day condemning union members, only to, lo and behold, it's emerged on crooksandliars.com that in fact they are union members and they're telling people, berating the unions.
Right, they're televangelists in America and they are part of unions that they are decrying. They're self-hating union members. Now,
yes.
but they're all like a cop or a teacher or a municipal worker who are part of unions. And I've been telling these people for years now to tie your wages to money supply. The money supply is up by billions. The money supply is up. The M2 is up 10, 20, 50%, 100%, 200%. You need to tie your wages to money supply, not the fabricated, nonsensical, quote-unquote, inflation number that is completely fabricated and has no representation in reality. And now, here in the U.S., Obama's talking about, well, let's raise the minimum wage, which is exactly equivalent to adjusting the monetary policy. If the Fed can move interest rates up and down on behalf of the banksters and make the economy completely artificial and remove supply and demand, remove free market economics and go to a planned, centrally controlled economy by adjusting the price of money, then the serfs need to be able to adjust the price of their minimum wage. Those two things would then balance each other out to some degree in this planned, centrally planned economy. But if the serfs can't adjust their wages tied to money supply, then you just have what we have now, which is a wholesale confiscation of wealth, an aggregation of wealth at the top 1% of the top 1%, and everyone else ending up like Greece, which are down there picking, seeds out of the rat poop to survive.
So again, we have a G20 meeting going on. People are talking about currency war. The finance ministers and global heads of state are talking about currency wars. Certain of these nations are accumulating gold, such as Russia and China, at rapid rates.
Well, they watch our show. I mean, Russia's buying gold. They're the biggest gold buyer in the world. Of course, this show is played in those countries where the IQ is high enough to stimulate people to buy gold, like Russia.
Now, one of the biggest banks in the world, a depository bank, is Bank of New York Mellon. And Michael Woolfolk was participating in this Bloomberg television debate with Kumar about the gold standard. And here is how Bank of New York Mellon's Michael Woolfolk responds. He says, if we went back to the gold standard, you would be looking at a global recession. We don't have enough gold, and it's not growing fast enough.
Well, this shows, Bank of Mellon, of course, and State Street Bank are involved in massive pensions scam, forex rigging, and fraud. And here's a man who represents fraud, who is making a fraudulent statement. There's something called price discovery in free market capitalism. According to supply and demand, if there's a high demand, the price goes up. But he's saying that we manage the supply and demand. We do manage wash trades to manipulate the price of gold and silver. We don't believe in free market capitalism. We envy the state of the Soviet Union. These people, they would love to live in a centrally planned communist nation where the state is basically controlling every single aspect of their lives. That's what this Americans, in every single American is essentially planned Egypt, screaming to get out. Meanwhile, in Moscow, they're embracing the free market. They're embracing logic. They're buying gold because they're not jackasses like these American pinheads like Bill O'Reilly and Rush Limbaugh, who are self-hating unionists who don't even understand what supply and demand means. And that's why they're becoming extinct. Okay, forget about guns. We know that the guns will wipe out plenty of them, but they're just going extinct because they're stupid.
So finally, of course, you can't have a shootout at the OK Currency Corral without some bourbon or whiskey. Maker's Mark waters down as bourbon to meet rising demand. Maker's Mark just got a little less stiff. The bourbon brand, known for its bottles sealed with red wax, told customers today that it's reducing the amount of alcohol in the beverage by 3% in order to meet rising global demand.
This is stealth inflation again, like the horse meat scandal in the UK. So their prices are making their product is going up, but they can't pass the price rise to the customer. So they're watering down the product. And they're trying to justify it by saying that there's a high demand, so we're watering down the product. That's retarded. That's stupid. And people don't want to know why the economy is not growing, why they're suffering. It's because the people who are making these decisions are functional idiots.
They've shown up to a gunfight with a knife.
Oh my God. Well, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half. We'll be speaking to Jan Scoyles of the Real Asset Company. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to turn to Jan Scoyles of the Real Asset Company. Jan, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Thank you for having me.
All right, Jan Scoyles. In a statement this week, G7 finance ministers and central bankers insisted they remain committed to exchange rates driven by the market, not government policy. Do you believe them?
I don't particularly believe them. I think the statement that came out from the G7 was quite confusing for everyone because they basically said that they don't support people that are affecting their exchange rates individually. As a collective group, it was hinted that that might not be such a bad idea like they did back in 2009 with the G20, but they support it maybe in domestic monetary policy actions. So we all know that there's a currency war going on and we're heading that way, and devaluation of currencies is happening, whether it's openly happening or it's just happening individually. No statement can change the fact or what everyone can clearly see.
So yeah, there's a G20 meeting today. It seems like the G20 meeting coming after the G7 meeting. You've got the G7 are the debtors, and now they're going to meet with their creditors, and they're coming up with a plan to meet with the creditors, the Chinas and the Russias of the world who are financing the West, so to speak. What's going to be their plan?
Well, I think they're going to go with the same policy because I think they're trying to go in with a united front, aren't they? And Japan, who, this is all kind of started from, that this currency war was happening. And meanwhile, like you say, you've got the creditor nations in the G20, and we've had at least 3 or 4 years of those nations saying that these currencies are being devalued and, we want to see something being done, and the way the international currency system is being run is too dollar-centric, and it's not fair on them. Brazil said that a couple of years ago, and they're now bringing it back, that they'd like to see a more internationally diverse international system. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend, but I don't think a huge amount is going to come out of it because, we need to, the G7 are too powerful to really want to change things at the moment.
Yeah, it's fun.